Thank you, Tony, very much. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We have a presentation to share. So my name is Sebastian Mikosz, and I have been appointed by Willie to lead IATA Environment and Sustainability team as of July the 1st. This is the first time IATA has appointed a senior vice president in this role, and I believe it underlines the strength of Willie and IATA commitment to sustainability. Of course, it's a great honor for me to lead this team during what I believe is one of the most consequential periods in the 100 years history of our industry. As a former airline CEO, I hope to bring my experience to all our members as we transition to a sustainable future. I don't underestimate the task ahead, but I'm confident that innovation and resilience, which is part of our industry DNA, will make us being successful. I, of course, look forward to more contacts with all of you, and I'll make sure that we inform you about all of our actions. Just to start this information process in the today agenda, we have 3 points I would like to share with you. It's an update on CORSIA coverage, what are the worrying trends for us on taxation proposals, and the progress on sustainable aviation fuel. So I'll briefly start with CORSIA, the carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation, which came into effect this year, 2021. As you all know, CORSIA is a global offsetting scheme, which means that through CORSIA, our airlines will offset any growth in CO2 emissions above 2019 levels. So CORSIA for us as IATA is a key medium-term strategy tool to stabilize aviation net emissions. What I would like to notice and show it through this slide is that we have a number of countries signing to CORSIA, and this number is growing. The symbolic number of 100 states was passed last week. Now we have 140 states who signed to the scheme, and we suppose that it's going to grow. But what is more important for us as industry is that thanks to those number of countries, 77% of aviation CO2 emission growth above the 2019 baseline level will be offset thanks to this number of countries that signed up. So it's a significant number. Of course, we hope more, but we would like as IATA to encourage that. And in order to encourage that, we developed a dedicated tool to help our airlines comply with CORSIA. And this tool is called IATA Aviation Carbon Exchange. This is a trading platform that we have created in order to give our airlines an easy access to top quality carbon credits. You have to know that for CORSIA, the credits first have to comply with very strict requirements laid down by ICAO. And these requirements takes the input of technical experts, industry, government, but very importantly also NGOs. So non-governmental organizations are part of the process of setting the requirements. Then those credits go through a certification process, which is carried by independent auditors. I can quote that the big 4 audit firms are part of these auditors, and this is how they get into being validated in accordance with CORSIA and ICAO expectations. I would like just to note, because it's important, that it's not just about CO2 emissions. Many of those projects bring additional benefits like improving livelihood of local communities, which are all in line with UN Sustainable Development Goals. So far, thanks to Aviation Carbon Exchange platform, we have offsetted 1.5 million tons of CO2. The target is that by the end of this year, 2021, to offset 2.2 million tons. What I also would like to share with you is that this platform is part of a Nico Hub concept of products that we are developing in IATA. Actually, it's a set of products which are about to put decarbonization in motion. What we want is to take decarbonization from theory to practice and give to our airlines tools like ACE, but many others, to really start implementing the decarbonization commitments. And we will continue informing you about those products in a real near future. So to sum up, CORSIA is a market-based tool for aviation to stabilize our emission in the medium term. But while the long-term solution are ramped up, we need to use CORSIA as an effective tool. So for us, it's a much more effective tool than government taxes that I would like to say a few words about, because we are very concerned by the proposed introduction of European tax on jet fuel. Actually, we are fundamentally against such a tax. You know, it's frustrating for us to because we don't see taxes raises in the name of environment actually helping the environment. For us, taxation is totally inefficient and ineffective as a mean of decarbonizing aviation. Taxation does not accelerate fleet renewal. It do not accelerate investment in cleaner technology, or, for example, deployment of sustainable aviation fuel. Actually, taxation is doing quite the opposite, because money goes into one big basket and there is no evidence that this money will be invested back into sustainable fuel or cleaner aircraft technology. It is also, of course, regressive, because it affects people who can afford the least the flying, and passengers already pay multiple taxes. So overall, decarbonization is not helped by taxation, because also it's always a local solution versus a global solution that we always advocate for. This is why we have a better proposal as IATA. Don't tax, but rather help us focusing on sustainable aviation fuel. And why to focus on sustainable aviation fuel? Because for us, sustainable aviation fuel is the best solution for decarbonizing in the long term. So about sustainable aviation fuel, we have good news and some challenges. The good news is that despite a very costly, 3 times more costly SAF than aviation kerosene, as you can see on the slide, airlines have increased in 2020 and 2021 the consumption of SAF by 55%, and we estimate that in 2021 this increase will be by 70% versus, of course, 2019. That's a good news. But there is a more challenging element, is that this is a fraction of what we consume. It's 0.01 of our overall fuel consumption. This is why we need SAF development, and this is why we need to focus on SAF. And let me say a few more words about this, on why we need it. So first, we have a problem with SAF. The biggest problem is that there is a limited supply and a way too high price. When I say limited supply, what we mean is we need oil companies to raise production. We don't make SAF as airline. We rely on those producers. So we have some early adopters in the industry who already started doing, but major oil companies are yet to make a commitment to SAF. Then we come to price. The more we have of SAF, the lower will be the price. So the consumption will automatically be much faster in an increase by our members, by the whole industry. So this is where we need government. Actually, we have and we need them globally, not only Europe. We need to ask government, and we are asking governments to apply the same logic as for other clean energies like solar or wind. We need incentive for producers. We need cheap financing for investments in the production of SAF, in the distribution. We need money for research to continue innovating around SAF, and also mandate, but mandate at a global, not local level, because as IATA, we're not against mandate. We are for them, and under the condition that they are in the right scheme, which gives a global solution. We see already some supportive governments, supportive policies like in the US, in UK, but we need governments to do much more about it. And I'm saying this because our board of governors has indicated that SAF is the technology we should be focusing on as a long-term decarbonization technology, and we need to deploy massively SAF to decarbonize the industry. So you will hear us and me and our voice a lot about SAF in the near future. Finally, let me remind that IATA and our industry had not waited for COVID to start environmental commitments. We were the first, as shown on that slide in 2009, to put a target, to put a figure on our commitment. We were also the first industry to set up a worldwide global agreement on decarbonization. And we also are an industry which does not forget other areas. I'll not talk about them today, but single use of plastic, noise management, waste management, our commitment to wildlife. This is all areas in which we are active. We are having a track record. We have an unwavering commitment that despite COVID, I have to say, 126 billion losses in 2020, 47 projected billion losses in 2021. We have our focus and we'll keep this environmental commitment focus in the near future. And my role, among others, will be to update you on any breakthroughs and any new elements of this activity. So thanks very much for listening to this update. And of course, I'll be available for any questions during today's media day. Thank you, Tony.
Great. Thanks very much, Sebastian. Willie, did you want to make any comments before we head on to questions?
Thanks, Tony. Just to reinforce everything that Sebastian has said, we at IATA, representing the industry, recognise that the issue of our environmental performance is top of the agenda. And while airlines are clearly focused on survival as we go through this crisis, it's very encouraging to see that airlines right across the world continue to invest in technology to ensure that their environmental performance is improved. So we're very confident that this industry will step up and deal with our impact in a way that will represent a truly fundamental commitment to addressing the footprint that the aviation industry has. And you can rest assured, as Sebastian said, that this will be top of our agenda as we go through the next couple of years. Thanks, Tony. I'll hand it back to you for questions.
Great. Thank you very much. We have a couple of questions in the queue. I'll remind everyone that if you do have a question, please do submit that via the chat function. And we'll start with the first question. First question comes from Germany, and it suggests that a German union demanded yesterday that governments set minimum prices for airline tickets. Also, it notes that Swiss legislators are considering putting on a carbon fee to offset aviation emissions. What are IATA's thoughts on these types of actions by governments?
Well, I think it's important to differentiate between competition issues where the trade union is recommending minimum charges to address a perceived competitive threat from other airlines, and when people are making recommendations in the interests of the environment. And this goes to the heart of what Sebastian says. I think if we're genuinely committed to improving the environmental performance of the industry, we should take steps to ensure that the long-term future addresses all of the concerns and not take short-term measures that may look popular. So the correct way to address the situation in the short term is using credible, audited and approved offsets, as Sebastian highlighted in his presentation. It's also to ensure that we make significant investment in the production and availability of sustainable aviation fuels. And we're very excited about that because, as you saw in the presentation, the technology exists. The impediment today is the price, but once we can get scaled production, the price clearly will reduce. And therefore, we believe the right thing to do is to invest in these technologies. That's why we want governments to focus on the development of sustainable fuels. We want oil companies to start producing the sustainable fuel. Time for talking is over. The time for action is now. And we want everybody in the extended industry to play their part and to raise their game, and indeed to raise their game significantly to ensure that we can achieve the targets that we believe are necessary for the industry.
Great, thank you very much. We have a question about an energy transition. So the question asks about our position on hydrogen, and the questioner notes that given the challenges with SAF availability, it might take ages to get the infrastructure for that, and could hydrogen perhaps be a better solution?
Well, allow me to comment, and then Sebastian can comment as well. The issue with sustainable fuels is the infrastructure is in place. So sustainable aviation fuel is what we call a drop-in fuel. So you can use it on existing aircraft and engines. It doesn't require any modification. The infrastructure is in place at all of the airports because you're just feeding it into the existing oil kerosene distribution system. Hydrogen is a potential source of improvement for the industry, and Airbus has committed to developing a hydrogen-powered aircraft by 2035, and we welcome that, and certainly we will keep the spotlight on Airbus to ensure that they do that. Clearly, what you need to see, though, is that the hydrogen has to be produced from clean energy, and a lot of energy is required to develop hydrogen. So I think there's more work to be done on hydrogen than there is in sustainable fuels. So if you look at between now and 2035, when Airbus believe they can have a hydrogen-powered aircraft, we believe that in that time frame, up to 2035, credible offsetting is a significant part of the solution, with the addition of more and more scaled production of sustainable fuels. Hydrogen is potentially part of the solution, but I think it's beyond 2035. I don't know, Sebastian, if you want to add or to comment.
Just to say that we are very conservative in our approach, and we take a technology that we know everything about today. As Willie said, it's a drop-in, so it can be used immediately, versus being cautious on a future technology. And even if the hydrogen plane arrives in 2035, we will still need SAF because the shift of fleet will not be immediate. So it's going to be, as Airbus announced, a mid-range plane, while we know that we pollute on long haul. So we need to address what is the biggest chunk of our pollution, which is long haul. And SAF seems to be the technology for us that is clearly available as we speak. We just need to ramp it up.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a couple more questions here. Sort of a very big picture question. Is IATA planning to revisit its long-term commitment, which is a 50% reduction by 2050 compared to 2005? What are we looking at for ICAO, the ICAO assembly next year? And I guess basically just what's the direction of the IATA commitment?
So you're quite right. As Sebastian said, in 2009, the industry came together and set the current target of a 50% reduction in net emissions. That was consistent with the Kyoto Protocol, updated by the Doha Agreement. But clearly in 2015, we had the Paris Accord, which set a more ambitious target for climate change, where previously the target was no more than 2 degrees against pre-industrial times. The objective now is to get closer to 1.5 degrees. So we recognize that we do need to update our targets. Our intention is to bring a proposal to our AGM, which we will be holding in Boston between the 3rd and the 5th of October. And you can wait to the AGM, and we hope you're all going to be present, because our intention is to hold that as an in-person event in October, and you will hear the update from IATA in relation to our new goals.
Great, thank you very much. Sebastian, a question to you. Someone's just asking for some clarification on the CORSIA figure. I think maybe a bit of misunderstanding in that we've reached 104 countries that have committed to the voluntary period. But maybe can you put a little bit of color around the countries that have volunteered, recent momentum in that area, and what we expect going forward?
So basically, the principle of CORSIA is that countries can volunteer by signing in the Annex 16 of the Chicago Convention, that they need then to translate into their own legislations. So countries are reporting that they are subscribing, they are volunteering, and this figure grows over time. Actually, there was a lot of discussions during the baseline on the number of countries that will be growing, but we've passed this number of 100. So it's not a sudden. I saw the question. It's not a 1 month assignment. It's a growing process where countries were were declaring this over time. Now ICAO has accepted it, and we've crossed this figure of 100, and now it's 104. So again, it's on voluntary basis, and this is where we are very happy to see that countries commit to then transfer it into their own legislation in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another question in the area of CORSIA, and it's talking about market-based measures and their coexistence. So, for example, EU ETS and other ETS schemes around the world, do we see them being able to coexist? And I suppose, what's the future vision for market-based measures?
Well, ideally, we would have a single measure and a single program to address the issue. We have expressed concerns in the past if we have a patchwork of various different measures that in fact it risks undermining the credibility of a global solution. And the critical thing here is this is a global problem. We are a global industry and we need a global solution. So while we recognize that the EU Commission is very much committed to the maintenance of their EU emissions trading scheme and believe that it has achieved significant benefit, which I don't question. In fact, I think there is clear evidence that it has. We need a solution that is acceptable on a global basis, and that requires everybody to come together. I think the development of CORSIA was a fantastic achievement to get not just the industry, but regulators and governments across the world. And as Sebastian has said, now over 100 governments have committed. I think when I looked at this in May, I think we were at 88 countries. We're now at 104. So you can see there's gathering momentum around CORSIA. And therefore, I believe we need to remain focused on the local solution to a global problem for a global industry.
Great, thank you very much. We have a question which reflects back on one of aviation's key achievements, which is the affordability of air travel. And the questioner asks, can we have a sustainable air transport industry that is also affordable?
I believe we can. And the key here is to ensure that we have sufficient volumes of sustainable aviation fuel at a price that is competitive with kerosene. And there's no reason to believe that we can't achieve that. You know, Sebastian is right to highlight the difference in price today, but that's principally because we have low-scale production. So we don't have the economies of scale that you would get from the widespread production of sustainable fuels. But it's very clear to us sufficient feedstock exists to create sustainable fuels for the vast majority of flights that we operate. And therefore, you know, we are absolutely committed to supporting the industry and to calling on others who are committed to addressing the environmental performance to put their attention on sustainable fuels. So it will require governments to recognize that this is the way forward in the medium term. We also call on fuel companies to turn their attention to the production of sustainable fuels. And, you know, you can rest assured that airlines will step up to the mark. But there's been fantastic developments in sustainable fuels in the past 15 years. I can remember when I was at British Airways in 2008, we had 2 responses to our RFP for biofuels. There was very, very little interest or even awareness of the issue. When you look at the progress we've made since then, I think it is very encouraging when you combine that to the ongoing investment that airlines are making in this area.
Great, thank you very much, Willie. We have actually a question that follows on that. You said that we believe there's enough feedstock in order to meet the SAF requirement. The questioner asks, where does the feedstock come from? And then perhaps just to make sure we're all on the same page, how is it that these fuels are really sustainable? Where does the sustainability come into their production?
Well, the feedstock will come from various different sources, so we're not dependent on a single source of feedstock. And more we're identifying where potential feedstock can be made available to the industry. And we're also getting different companies focusing on different supply chains. So if I go back to my previous role at BA and IAG, we had committed to projects turning municipal waste into a sustainable biofuel. That was principally because of the nature of the UK market, where there's still a lot of waste going into landfill. There's a landfill tax, so you avoid that tax if you're using the waste for other purposes. And of course, the environmental benefit of avoiding waste into landfill is significant. So not only can you recycle the CO2, and that's where the benefit comes from, you also avoid the production of other greenhouse gases like methane. Sebastian, I don't know if you want to add to that?
Just to say that we have commissioned a study more than a year ago, done together with the MIT, on the availability of sustainable feedstock for our needs and our projections. There's more than 7 technologies today with different feedstock sources that are sustainable and that can provide more scalability. So scalability issue doesn't come today from the feedstock. It comes from the fact that we need refineries to shift their capacity or to create the capacity to deliver SAF, not only in Europe and the US, but worldwide. So we are very confident that this is absolutely possible.
Okay. I see we have a couple of questions that are asking for timelines. So in the first case, it would be the timeline to perhaps 100% SAF use. And when do we see that? Is that the plan? And when will we see that happening? And if not, what is the blend between SAF and other technologies that we would see going forward?
Maybe, Sebastian, you want to address this, but we're not just depending on 100% SAF. So as I've said, to address the issue today, because CORSIA is in place, we're looking at offsetting. We want to ramp up the production of sustainable fuels. We see hydrogen and other forms of new technology, be it electric, hybrid electric, for parts of the industry. We also see evidence of carbon capture and storage. That clearly is an opportunity for the industry as well. So we're not just focusing on one area. The reason we're highlighting in this presentation the importance of CORSIA is because it's in place, it is credible. You will see airlines committing billions of US dollars to credible offsetting that have been tested and have been audited. So anybody who challenges the availability and the credibility of these schemes just needs to look at how much money the industry will be spending, but also recognize that airlines are not just investing in sustainable aviation fuels, but are looking at other technologies, including hydrogen and carbon capture technologies. Sebastian?
So just a couple of specifications. We cannot fly today legally at massive scale on 100% SAF. You have to understand that SAF it can be available in our engines generally just as a part of the fuel. Actually, first, there is a technical limit. There is just a safety requirement that not more than 50% of fuel can be SAF origin. So the first barrier to go fully to SAF is that we will have over time, and I'm sure OEMs will do that, we will have to relieve that barrier. That's number one. Number two, as we speak today, we're talking about a 2% blend mandate that, for example, European Union wants to put forward, with a growing part of SAF to 5-7% over time into the existing kerosene. So that's an important element. And then we, as industry, when we design long-term plans, we see SAF, of course, and the growth of SAF as the most known and massive implementation. But we have at least four pillars. We are, in order to decarbonize, very keen on seeing investment in infrastructure. Air traffic control is one of this possibility. Of course, SAF. Of course, offsetting, and of course, which role is going to be decreasing, and the fourth pillar, which is going to be technological improvements, like Willie just mentioned, hydrogen, hybrid planes, all the technologies that are about to come, but we don't know yet what that timeline and efficiency is going to be to decarbonize the industry. So the blend is going to be always focused for the moment in the biggest part around SAF. I can say more than 70% of what we see in the future, and these other technologies and these other improvements will be lesser and lesser while we go forward, unless there is some disruptive technology that we don't know about. But again, being conservative, this is not what we take is consideration, because it's all about our credibility of delivering this target.
We've talked a lot about SAF, and we've talked about the price being too high. So we have a question saying, what would be an acceptable price for SAF in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it doesn't need to be the same price of kerosene, because clearly, if you look at the benefit of SAF, where we think the carbon footprint is about 70 to 80% lower than kerosene, what you can do is factor in the price of carbon on top of the price of the fuel. So we recognize that SAF may not match exactly the price of kerosene, but with kerosene, there clearly will come a carbon cost. With SAF, that carbon cost is significantly reduced. But the bottom line is, in the same way as we will pay whatever the price is for the fuel that we use, in the future, we will pay whatever the price is for SAF, because the future of the industry requires us to demonstrate that we have a credible pathway to address our environmental performance. And the industry will step up and will do what is necessary to ensure that we achieve that target, while clearly being focused on our financial sustainability as well.
Okay. Continuing on with the SAF discussion, there's a question asking, if the industry wants to buy SAF, why haven't the producers stepped up? What's the barrier to them coming to the table with more supply?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I see Sebastian smiling, so I'm sure he'll have comments in relation to this as well. But clearly, in the same way as it's in the interest of Boeing and Airbus to continue to produce the A320 family and the 737 family with the existing technology, working with Rolls-Royce, GE, Pratt & Whitney, because they have that in place and clearly want to maximise the benefit. There has to be an incentive to move them to a new platform of technology. Now, that incentive is going to come from the industry because we're going to demand it. But the fuel companies, the oil companies, are clearly interested in continuing to produce kerosene because they've made significant investment in that area. We need them to step up to the mark. It's not good enough that these people talk about wanting to achieve carbon neutrality and net zero in 2050. We need them to be part of the solution, and therefore they've got to start putting their money and their investment and their focus on sustainable fuels in the same way as they've focused on jet kerosene for many, many years. So I think the critical thing here is that the industry will demand it, because what will be unacceptable to us is if everybody who benefits from our industry in the wider aviation chain thinks that the airlines will just write a big check. We're not going to do that. We clearly will pay the price that is necessary, but we expect others to invest and to pay the price as well. And I'll hand over maybe Sebastian, if you want to add to that.
No, I was smiling because this is one of the biggest debates that we have, is how and when we can see a significant decrease of SAF costs. And I don't want to be mean, but it's all about investment and profits. Actually, at the scale of what we do in our industry, we have, 30 years baskets of development. From the first jet engine, it took 30 years to reduce by half our emissions. And now, at the scale of what we do, SAF is a next-gen technology. It's been, as Willie was saying, 10, 15 years really on the market. So we need to give ourselves a little time, but put a strong pressure on explaining to the oil producers, to refineries, and to whoever wants to produce SAF, because it doesn't have to be only oil producers or refineries, that we demand that there is more availability and that there is more investment in technology so the price can go down. We will do our part, but they also have to do their part, and that's going to be a very strong message from us.
Okay, thank you. We're running a little tight on time, but we'll take a couple more questions. So we have talked a lot about SAF, but there's a question asking about potential savings from air traffic management, and in particular, what's going on with the Single European Sky project?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you for bringing it up. Sebastian made reference to air traffic control in his comments earlier. We see this, quite frankly, as a scandal. Europe needs to address the inefficiency in the air traffic system And we need politicians to step up and address this issue. This is not a technology issue. This is a lack of political will to address it. It's well documented on a conservative basis that CO2 from operations in Europe, aviation in Europe, could be reduced by 10% if the single European sky was introduced. And there's no technological impediment to that. The airlines have already invested in the technology that is required. It's on our aircraft today. It's been on our aircraft for many years. So we can operate in a single European sky environment. We need to see the politicians who are quick to lecture us about what it is we must do, but slow to take action on what it is they can do. So there's a massive change and benefit available to the industry if the single European sky is implemented. And it's very important that everybody pays attention to what's happening there, because it's unacceptable that the airline industry continues to pay for gross inefficiency, both through the cost impact on fuel today, but more importantly, through the additional CO2 that's being generated that could be avoided if we address this simple issue of the single European sky.
Okay, thank you. And we'll take one last question. And I guess there are two parts to this question. One is, what can we expect the industry to be talking about at the AGM, particularly in terms of targets for the industry? And secondly, there have been a couple of questions asking why our targets are focused on 2050 when lots of people are saying that the climate crisis is today, and is there anything that the industry can do to accelerate its commitments into areas that are closer to the present?
Well, it's a very good question. The reason we're focused on 2050 is that is what aligns to the current Paris Agreement and to what most governments are focused on. I think it's also critical that we're credible in terms of what it is we can achieve. There's no point in us coming out with a target that we know cannot be delivered on. And when we look at the various platforms that are available to us, and Sebastian highlighted some of those, air traffic control could give us an immediate benefit. SAS and the development of SAF could give us some benefit in the short to medium term. Hydrogen is some way away, as is electric and hybrid electric on scale, and carbon capture is still at the early stages of development and clearly has potential, and who knows what else will be available. So in setting a goal, we want to be able to demonstrate that there is a credible path to achieving that goal. This is not about just good words. This is about actions on the part of the industry. Sebastian?
No, I just wanted to underline that we have airlines, when they can, who committed to earlier targets. But our job as IATA is to be global for the whole industry and have a target which all the industry can embrace. Therefore, 2050, in line with Paris Agreement, seems to be credible, doesn't stop some of our members from doing it earlier.
Great. Thank you very much. I see maybe we have time for one last question. And the question refers to an expected package coming from the European Commission next week, which is Fit for 55. It's meant to look at the European strategy going forward on energy transition. What is the aviation industry expecting from that? And how does that, I suppose, interact with other European initiatives like Refuel and the EU ETS?
Yeah, very important. And, what we expect and what we would hope to see may be different things, but it would be very encouraging if in that there was a recognition of the benefit of the single European sky. I think if the single European sky is not addressed, we will really have to question whether the Commission is committed to achieving these targets, because that is something that can be done with the technology that exists today, with little or no financial investment, as I said, as we've already made the investment in that, and really does come down to political will. So we will be watching with great interest. What we know is that the European industry, European airlines, are absolutely committed because they recognise maybe ahead of some other parts of the world that this is something that needs to be addressed. And you've seen it yourselves from the financial investments that European airlines are making and the commitments that they are making to improving their environmental performance. And I've no doubt that we as an industry will play our part to work with the Commission to achieve the goals that they have. But I would hope that one of those goals will be the quick implementation of the Single European Sky.
Excellent. Thank you very much, both Willie and Sebastian. Sebastian, did you have a last comment you wanted?
No, thanks.
Okay, great. With that, we're running a little bit late, so apologies for that, but thank you very much, Willie and Sebastian, and for all those who asked questions. Really good discussion, I think.